folks, my name is Dave Rudden and I am the author of the Knights of the Borrowed Dark trilogy, as well as 2 Doctor Who anthologies for the BBC, 12 Angels Weeping and the Wintertime Paradox. And today I'm going to be giving you some useful tips on how to approach writing horror. Now, you can use these to work on short stories or movie scripts or TV scripts or anime or comics. You can even use these in school if you have to write short stories for looming exams, speaking of horror. And the first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to approaching writing horror is originality, okay? This is the struggle at the heart of all writing. On one side, you want to feel like you're writing something new and interesting and exciting. On the other side, everything you write is connected to and in conversation with everything that has gone before. And I get asked a lot about cliché, and the thing about cliché is that cliché is not inherently bad. Right? Cliches are around for a reason. There is a reason why we enjoy action movies. There is a reason why we enjoy haunted house horror, even though those stories have been told a million times. And the reason I tell people to avoid cliché is because when you write something that is cliched or when you copy something else, you are now in competition with that other story. Okay, if you write a vampire story, nothing wrong with that. Vampires, classic monster, been around a million years. The thing is, if you write a vampire story and you don't do anything new with it, you are now in competition with every other vampire story that has ever existed, okay? It is very, very hard to stand out. There is a horror movie called 30 Days of Night, which came out around the time that Twilight was the biggest thing in the world. And at a time when everybody was doing these stories of cold, lonely vampires who went to school and played baseball for some reason. 30 Days of Night was about a small town in Alaska called Barrow, where every year around about Christmas, it gets dark for a month. And this particular Christmas, all these vampires attack the town, knowing that the greatest weapon against them, the rising sun, has been taken away. The vampires in this story are not cold, sad baseball players. They are vicious wolves in human form with long, sharp shark's teeth, and at one point eat a child like a Capri Sun. It's gross. I love it. So because that did such a different thing with vampires than Twilight, it stood out. And this is what you want to think about, okay? This is also something you can apply to when you're in an exam and you're being given like 2 or 3 short words to build an entire story on. You have to ask yourself, what can you do with this idea? How can you make it different? How can you make it yours, okay? So let's take a cliche. Haunted house stories, right? You can name a million of these, but people will keep making them because first of all, they're relatable, okay? Stories set in creepy houses remind us of all those times we have been sitting at home and heard a noise where there should not be a noise, okay? They're entirely relatable. We've all watched a horror movie and then looked at our own house slightly differently afterwards. Also, my definition of a good idea is one that gives you more ideas. Okay, when you're frantically brainstorming for writing a story for school, or you're trying to come up with a story yourself for a competition or for getting published, a good idea is one that offers you the chance to come up with more ideas. And a bad idea is a dead end. So if you decide on a haunted house story, suddenly you have all these other things to come up with that offer you more opportunities for good ideas. So a haunted house, okay, who built it? Where is it? How did it kill the last people who lived there? Side note, it really bugs me in horror movies when people show up and they get the key from the letting agent and they say, what happened to the last people who lived here? And the letting agent says, yeah, they ate each other. And the person buying the house just goes, class, that'll be the baby's room. Like, do your research. So what happened in this house before, okay? What is the ghost? What is the creature? What is the horror? Are there people who lived there, were traumatized and got out? All of these options exist now because you've chosen haunted house, and each of these is an opportunity for you to stand out and be different and be better. The Haunting of Hill House, which if you haven't watched it is pretty good, although the last episode is terrible, that is mostly a film about or a TV show about a haunted house, but it's also about this family and the guilt they feel and the anger they feel at each other. And that core story and those characters with their interesting conflicts with each other carries you through the bits where it would just be boring. Okay, so that's 2. 3, they tap into something primal. Okay, they tap into something universal and human, and that is the idea of not being safe in a place where you should be safe. Okay, when you are at home, you should feel safe. You are able to close the door on the outside world and be protected from what's outside. This goes back to when we were like animals in trees. Okay, having a creature or a ghost or a monster or a horror or a curse or a warlock, I don't know, attack you where you live brings the horror home. Okay, and everybody can understand that. Finally, you can use a haunted house story to talk about the economy, to talk about home ownership, to talk about family, to talk about something that is very real and very current. Okay, so for example, there is a really interesting horror movie that just came out that I can't think of the name of, but I will pop it in the thing when I do. And in this horror movie, it is about 2 refugees who have been moved to a new country for a new start. But the house they have been put up in, the social housing they put up in, is cursed and haunted. And on one side, the female character is like, we need to get out of here, we're going to die. On the other side, the guy is like, if we can't make here work, where else are we going to go? This is our second chance. If we resist it or turn our noses up at it, we will never get another one. Okay, and that is very current and very topical. Okay, you have the idea of a family coming apart at the seams, and the house becomes almost a mirror or a metaphor for this family tearing itself apart. Okay, you can talk about one of the things that like I joked about earlier was the idea of like, why don't they just leave the haunted house? But if you've bought a house and you've sold your other one, where are you going to go? Okay, if you don't have family, if you don't have friends, you are stuck there and you have to make a go of it. And that pressure makes your story really interesting. So when you're taking a horror concept, and I'm going to give you guys some really like cliched and boring horror concepts now, I want you to take them and dissect them and ask yourself, firstly, what is the reason this idea has stuck around so long? Why is this still so relevant to us, even though these stories have been told for hundreds of years? And I want you to ask yourself, how can I make this story relevant to me and my audience? Okay, so whatever age you are watching this, ask yourself how you would make this story interesting to people your own age. Whether it's an interesting teenage protagonist, whether it's a really, really frightening monster, whether it's simply setting a story somewhere that has never been set before. There aren't many Irish vampire stories. There aren't many Irish werewolf stories. You can bring a story home and therefore make it feel new and fresh. But ask yourself those questions. Ask yourself how you make this thing new by making it closer to you. So you've taken a concept and you've tried to find a way to make it feel original. So what do you do next? The next thing you need is a really strong main character. Okay, we will not care about the concept or the monster or the setting if the main character that we're following isn't interesting. Now, the way you make a character interesting, and this is true of horror or any other genre you want to write, is you make sure that they have a reason for what they're doing. This is called motivation, and it is crucial. Okay, if your character does not have a good reason for what they're doing, the audience will not believe them and they will immediately lose interest in this character. Think of the rom-coms you've watched where you didn't believe the couple should be together, or you thought the guy was an absolute jackass and you were like, this is not believable, find somebody else, he's dreadful. Okay, think about any movie you've watched where the main character is just kept searching through the haunted house and you're like, just go, just leave, and you didn't believe they had a reason to keep going, or you didn't believe they had a reason to try and find their friend. Always have a solid motivation for your character, especially in horror, because in horror, those motivations are going to get tested. Okay, they're going to get stress tested by the situation. You need to come up with a reason for the main character to not just decide, I'm out and to leave. Okay, if you've seen Midsummer, a recent very good horror film, the main character goes along with her boyfriend on holiday for a very specific reason. Okay, I won't ruin it. Watch the film. When they get to this remote location and things turn out to be dangerous, it is so remote, there is no easy way for them to get back. The boy, terrible boyfriend, has a reason to stay there, and he convinces the girlfriend to stay, even though it's against her best interests. Okay, we would all like to believe that we would realize instantly we were in a horror film, but the fact is, if all of your friends are telling you it's fine, and if people you respect are telling you to stay, that is reason enough for you to ignore the dread that is rising up around you and stick it out for one more day or another few hours. Okay, so make sure your character has a good reason for doing what they're doing. The next thing that you want to think about is how the horror corresponds to your character. There's a question you have to answer when it comes to fiction, no matter what you're writing, and that is, why are we following this character and not any other character? Why is your main character the main character? Okay, and in horror, the reason that our main character is our main character is not just because the thing is happening to them, but it's because the thing connects to them. Okay, so in Midsummer, the main character feels adrift from everybody. She has lost very important people to her. She is clinging on to her terrible boyfriend, and she wants to feel like she belongs somewhere. And that is why the events of the film happen to her the way they do. Okay, in Terminator, Sarah Connor is the main character because the thing is coming for her. She is being hunted. It is on her to rise up and to deal with it. In Terminator 2, probably the best sequel of all time, she is also being hunted again, but she is now trained for it and she is ready for it. Okay, there's a really solid horror movie called Hole in the Ground by Irish director Lee Cronin, and the main character, this young woman, a single mother and her kid, they move to a little remote house, and she begins to worry her son has been replaced by a changeling. And this could be a generic horror plot, but over the course of the film, you begin to realize that however her relationship with the father of her child ended, it did not end well. And so this woman who is dealing with the fact her son has suddenly kind of changed and feels like he's kind of turned on her, you realize she has unfortunately painful experience of what it's like for someone to go from being someone really lovely to really horrible. And you realize she's uniquely sensitive to this thing happening again, which makes her an excellent main character, because on one side, she is uniquely sensitive to this horrible thing happening. On the other side, she's had practice. And now, this time, she is not going to let events repeat themselves. And that provides her motivation for going forwards, because the story matters to her. Always be like shaping your monster for your main character. Always use your monster to say something about the main character, and to have that main character be connected to the monster in a way that means it has to be them. Okay? Now, when it comes to monsters, love a good monster, right? Absolutely love a weird and creepy and terrible thing. One of the best things about coming up with horror is about coming up with the creepy monsters that you're going to use. In Knights of the Borrowed Dark, I didn't want to use monsters that had been done to death. So instead of having vampires or werewolves or whatever, I used creatures called the Tenebrous. Tenebrous are creatures made of oil and hunger. When they drip into our reality, they build themselves a body out of whatever they can find. A Tenebrous that breaches in a junkyard might have long claws of scrap metal or of skin made from fused, rusty wire. A Tenebrous that breaches in a winter forest might have long limbs woven together from vines and lie in wait like a spider for its prey. Some of them even take the form of people. Now, what this allowed me to do is constantly come up with new monsters. After you fight 50 vampires, they are no longer frightening. Okay, watch Buffy. If you are fighting werewolves, eventually you get good at fighting werewolves. Okay. If your monsters and villains are constantly changing, there is no defense. every battle is like your first battle. You are always living on the raw edge of your adrenaline. And this makes things really exciting, not just for the reader, but for me, because it means every time I come up with a new villain, I am writing a horror movie in miniature. Okay, I am looking at video game concept art. I am reading horror. I am researching weird creatures. I am looking up myths and legends. Every monster is a new opportunity to shock and awe and be terrifying. So think about your monsters. Think about connecting them to the main character, and also think about being subtle. This is a thing that gets forgotten about a lot in horror, where it's really easy to just throw a bucket of gore at the screen or have someone's eyes grow teeth and run off on spider legs or whatever. And that's just, eventually you become deadened to that. You become used to it. You can sometimes be more original in your horror by going smaller and more detailed. Have any of you ever been to one of those haunted houses they put up at Halloween? Just realized this is a video. I don't know if you have your hand up or not. I once went to one of these haunted houses type things in New York. Very, very expensive. It was called Sleep No More. I think they spent like $6 million on taking a space roughly the size of a shopping center, dividing it up and making it into this like maze of terror. So you go in, they bring people onto an elevator and they leave you off on different floors. I get off on the last floor. It's a long corridor, right? And on this long corridor, there is loads of doors. It looks a bit like a hospital, right? But not like a good hospital, like not a nice hospital. And I'm immediately quite freaked out, especially because they're playing this music like a violin bow pulled down a heart. Not good. And I decide what I'm going to do as somebody who's acted. I'm going to find the duct tape. I'm going to find the phone plugged into the charger. I'm going to find the little thing that proves this is fake and not real. And so I start looking around. I go into the first room. And in the first room, there is a seat, like a dentist seat, but not like a good dentist seat. And the sleeves or the armrests are all ripped up and torn, like someone tried to get out. And there's all these folders on the wall. And like I've been in plays, so I know that like nobody actually sits down and fills out like the fake folders or whatever. And I take a folder off the wall and I look at it, and it is full of just the most horrific medical imagery I've ever seen. And I take a step backwards and something crunches under my foot. It's a tooth. And it's like, I just wanted to go to the cinema. But that little detail, like there's lots of other bigger horror stuff there, but it was that tiny detail, that little papier-mâché tooth or whatever, wherever they got it, I don't know. $6 million buys you a lot of teeth. Wherever they got it, that detail stuck me like a pin. That detail like crawled into my soul and will never leave. So think a lot about not just like going big in terms of your monsters and your weirdness, but go small, go precise. I'm going to do a short reading from my new collection of Doctor Who short stories called The Wintertime Paradox. And in this scene, two characters have shown up at a family's door on Christmas Eve. And I wanted to get across, without them overtly being monstrous, I wanted to get across just how weird they were, but in a slow and subtle way where you wouldn't immediately slam the door on them. So this is from one of the stories in the anthology. It's called Christmas with the Plasmavores. It's a French name, said Henry Plasmavore, and smiled so widely you could see every tooth in his head. Very common. Very normal, added Madeleine Plasmavore. She was smiling too, but she had no teeth at all. Very human and normal. They filled the doorway of the Sullivan home like jelly in a mould, a pair of squat, fleshy rectangles in identical black button-up coats. A beret had deflated on Madeleine's scalp. Henry had a red scarf crimping the dead white flesh of his neck. Other than that, it was surprisingly difficult to tell them apart. Catherine disliked them on sight. This was not an uncommon reaction for Catherine. It wasn't that she had anything against people on principle, but she had simply decided 6 months ago that she had met enough people and didn't need to meet any more. There was a quota. She had reached it. Her father Morris had tried to explain to her that there wasn't a quota actually, and even if there was, she couldn't have reached it because she was 9. This was just one of the many things on which Catherine and her father did not see eye to eye. And your car broke down? Morris Sullivan was small for a dad. He dressed in oversized cardigans even in summer, and his receding hair stuck up in tufts as if waving for help. Morris needed help with a lot of things. He had to be reminded to take his anxiety medicine. He sometimes worked so hard he forgot to eat, and Catherine had to remind him to do that too. The only reason there was a stubby little Christmas tree in the corner was because Catherine had reminded him it was Christmas, and she wished she'd had the presence of mind to also remind him that you didn't open the door to strange people at midnight on Christmas Eve. But now he had, and the plasmavores loomed above them, both like the twin halves of a Venus flytrap about to snap shut. So, concept, character, monster. There are 2 final things that you need to create a good horror story. The first one is that you need to have a structure. Now, this is where watching TV has actually been training you your entire life, because movies and TV work to a very particular schedule. Their structuring is incredibly tight. And if you have ever watched a half an hour long sitcom like Brooklyn Nine-Nine or Friends or How I Met Your Mother or The Simpsons or Futurama or Rick and Morty or whatever, you know how to write a short story. Okay? All short stories and all movies and all TV, except for like a few exceptions, that's helpful, have a very similar structure. And this structure starts off with an introduction. So the introduction basically sets the stage and sets the scene and teaches the audience what is normal for the main character. Okay? So Harry Potter lives under a cupboard, life is terrible. Morty in Rick and Morty lives with his parents and his sister. His life is boring. He's a bit of a nerd. He has a crush on a girl in school. Fast and the Furious. Paul Walker's character is a cop who specializes in high-speed crimes. Now, this gives you the normal setting, the baseline for your main character's life. We now need something to show up to make your main character's life more exciting. This is called the complication. Something shows up that sends your character's life off on a new path. A new gang of criminals start being better and faster and better drivers than anyone before, and Paul Walker is assigned to go undercover with them. Morty's grandfather, Rick, who is a dimension-hopping, time-traveling uber scientist, moves in and starts causing chaos, okay? Harry finds out he's a wizard, finds out Wizard Hitler is trying to kill him. All of these things complicate the main character's life, and the main character must now deal with them. This is true as well of horror. Character moves into a house, slowly starts to realize house is haunted. Character has a brush with death, gains psychic powers, and finds out that someone is coming to kill them. Something shows up, makes the main character's life more complicated and more stressful, and the main character now has to deal with this problem. So, over the course of the plot, and you'll see this in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you'll see this in in The Simpsons, few jokes at the start to establish who our characters are. Boyles is weird, Rosa is terrifying and wonderful. Terry loves yogurt. Then something will come along, usually a case or something they'll have to deal with. Now, all of these complications will build up and build up and build up until something very specific happens. The character is reduced to their lowest moment, okay? The moment of most pain and tension and worry. This is literally called the WWW moment, the worst moment when you screenwrite. So depending on the horror you're writing, you need to get the character to a point where the stress and the torment and the terror is so bad, they're at their lowest point and they have nowhere to go but up. So whether it's they decide to go back into the burning house and get their kid, they decide to confront the monster head on, they sharpen a stake, get across and decide to go and defeat the vampire. Bring your character to their lowest point so that the only place they have to go is back up. And this leads you to the climax, the most exciting moment of your story, where it's, Everything else stripped away. It is main character versus their fear, main character versus their villain. Finally, you have the resolution. And this is just the ending. This is how your character has changed, what they've learned, whether they're still alive or not, whether the murderer or the ghost or the villain or the dragon goes off to deal more horror and torment to other people. The next time, this is your homework, the next time you're watching a horror movie, note these moments. Note our introduction to the characters. Note our complication. Note our worst moment, the moment where literally it all feels like everything is lost. Note how that rises up to a climax, and then look at the resolution and see whether they got out alive. And this is my final little piece of advice for you if you want to write horror. You need to give your heroes a chance, okay? If you do not give them a chance, if the outset is already decided from the beginning, your story is less interesting. Because if they have a chance, there's a chance of success, which means when they lose, it's all the more powerful. Maybe they mess up the chance by being selfish. Maybe they give the chance of survival to somebody else and heroically sacrifice themselves, okay? That is more exciting. If they have lost from the beginning, then what was the point? Okay? Then there was never anything at stake. Hopelessness is the death of horror because the worst has already happened. Hope is where you find horror because there's that tiny chance, and if they try, they can fail. I hope this was useful. Do try writing your own horror stories. Do mess around with different monsters, different characters. Like, remember that nothing has to be good on the first try, so practice, practice, practice. Check out my Doctor Who horror stories if you get a chance. You don't need to know a whole lot about Doctor Who to enjoy them. Do also check out the Knights of the Borrowed Dark trilogy. If you're a teacher watching this, I've got teaching resources for my books, which are on the Junior Cert on daverudden.com. Finally, I've been Dave Rudden. Thank you very much.